Welcome to TradeTheMBI.com. This is John's Reports for the 21st of June. Well, we talked about this setup as it was developing here. We had our MBI, the magenta crossed below yellow right at this stage. We also had talked about this one as well, the DO Fast. 4220 was the threshold by which you would be thinking short versus long. We also had the MBI white at 6, daily 5.5 for rising. Ideally, crossing the red is the strongest, which next day we had further decay of the magenta below yellow, and this time we also had orange dipping down below the 33 level, and that led to option expiration, and boy, it was volatile, and we expected it to be. And the problem is that with these readings, we had weak everything leading into it, so we were expecting it was going to be volatile and negative as long as it stayed below that ABM yellow, and in fact moved all the way to the 50% line that fast. And this is something we always talk about. Those down days are always bigger. The fact that we closed with white 15.47 over magenta suggests that we will have further weakness. We still had some decent MBI short-term buyers buying into it, and that was a lot of this is the transition from the contracts into others, but there was just some general apathy about reapplying some of those gains back into the market, and I think that that's going to get them a cheaper price. Does it look like it's over, though? That's the question. How far will they let that go? Because the 50% mark on the Fibonacci there, or in our case, the Morganacci, because of the way it adjusts, it would be interesting. It doesn't look like it should hold. In fact, it should break below that. From the NQ standpoint, not as bad. Still above the ABM. So this is, again, and we recognize that because the NASDAQ was not showing the weakness that the S&P was. So you have a move into more tech because it was obviously more sold than the S&P had been earlier. So that reflected right there. Of course, now we've filled all the positive extremes for the euro setup coming back, and realization that inflation is not just going to be transitory. You finally got that assessment, and that's an indication there's still going to be better growth out of the U.S. than Eurozone in that. So finally, people woke up, but this was so elevated relative to performance anyway. We should have been below the 117 to 114 range anyway. But it's just normalizing back into that space. We had been talking about Bitcoin from its standpoint. You've had all these YouTubers and experts all wanting everything to go to the moon and everything, but we know that from the MBI readings, and it was interesting because this happened to be corresponding to Goldman announcing they were going to allow Bitcoin trading, and it makes sense from their standpoint because if you want the futures products to be viable, by them having access to it gives them an opportunity to short more in a real functional way, and so kind of surprise people, particularly the ones that are new trading in cryptos, don't understand how the implementation into the futures market. Back when it happened, we talked about it, that it was going to be a beautiful opportunity for market makers to really be able to add to the manipulation with it and really create beautiful trades. But every time we get this positive white over magenta, we expect that 0%, and it stayed above, so we were expecting that to continue. And when this spike happened right here at the 23%, we were expecting new lows, and sure enough, it did exactly what was expected of it. Even from 50K, this is what we were looking at early on. In the day, it started off with this peak one here. That led to the 0%, and then we kind of maintained over it, which so wasn't expecting anything. And then later in the day, when this finally popped up, even after an orange, it was like, no, this isn't going to go anywhere. So it's one of those where you got an opportunity to get out if you tried to flip along to it. It was like you knew that we were going to be heading back to the lows on that setup, and sure enough, made new lows from a 50K standpoint. Intraday, you can see how that tail end looked. And again, I'm posting these nonstop. The only red target one that I had right here was this setup right here that happened because when it did take place with the magenta had already made a higher peak. Not necessarily a problem. It usually just means that you're a couple hours away from that eventuality, particularly if you don't have orange dipping below red DOC. In this case, you did have the orange dip below, but you had green above as well. And so that meant you were going to have a more sustained run, and that was the key point with that one. And it wasn't until the secondary setup and then it started to decay. Of course, this one got bought back up, but we did reach the zero. It wasn't just a matter of time. And then we were back at the 50% again. That one was clear. There was no question what was going to happen with that. And when it did reach the zero, you were still looking at white over magenta, suggesting that was going to continue further. And right up to the end of the day, it finally turned around right over here. But did you have any reset that was worthwhile? This setup right here can produce a little bit of up, but with no closes below, above the 23%, and also that shakeout well below negative 13.5. I'm more than happy to wait to see that shakeout move above the negative 13.5 before thinking about taking a long setup in that one, particularly when the market's down so severely. All in all, I don't think there's anything to complain about any of this. It was spot on with the short dot setups showing above it. And it was pretty clean action. There was still plenty of opportunity to take some little long pots in between, but by and large, this day was pretty set early on, opening significantly lower, and it just doubled that dip. So there could be a lot more of that within configuration, depending on when short-term buyers, of course, are able sometimes to hold things in place for a while, but we didn't see any support from long-term. And you're not quite a ways before new fund money comes in for the next month. So, and that's going to correspond with the 4th of July setup. So that'll be interesting too. So it'll be interesting to see if we get additional down movement, how players will react, particularly given the excessive marginalization that people have been using, trading some of these popular names and stuff like that. There could be significant movement if things start to go wrong for people and they have to trade out. And I usually, we used to talk about gold in that same context as like kind of putting Bitcoin up there, because a lot of people substituted and went to cryptocurrencies in exchange for buying gold. But whenever you have market carnage and they have margin situations, they tend to have to sell those off and use that to cover margin calls and or that potential. If this happens for more than a couple of days, then you could see some significant sell-off if actual margins are having to be called in that. So that's what I'm looking for, and we'll see how that takes place on Monday, and whether this was just transitory because of the option expiration and funds just waiting to let a little bit of settling take place before and see if they can find some cheaper pricing before they rotate into new setups. As always, I will update you at the Skype chat and put up additional charts as relevant. Trade well. We'll talk to you later.